Everyone. And first of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present my work. This is the second time because I think last year I presented another paper on a completely different argument on loneliness and health. As Matlu was saying, and as I was saying before, I'm a researcher at the European Commission in the Joint Research Center. And the Joint Research Center is one of the directorates of the Commission. This one is located in Italy, and we provide the policy support for other directorates and based on research in different dimensions, also in fields and economics, of course, included. And the paper that I'm going to present today, titled What Women Want and the Gender-Based Norms and STEM Occupational Choices, is not part of the research that we are doing in the Commission. However, it is partly related to some initiatives on inequalities, disparities that we have, but it is, it is part of my personal research. And this paper is a joint work with a colleague of mine, Cristina Elisa Orso, from the University of Insubria, which is located in the north of Italy, quite close to this center here. And as you can see from the title, this argument is not completely new, of course, and we are all more or less familiar with the general context. And the gender segregation in education or in occupation is a well-known phenomenon. But however, this does not mean that it's fully understood. So what we want to do with this paper is just to add a small evidence to the existing literature on the factors that may influence, that may make some women choose STEM occupations and others not. So we will consider in this work a pool of women, and we will try to understand what are the specific factors that may make some women more interested in choosing STEM and others not. So, as you can already guess, the main building block of this story that I will tell you, and I hope that you will believe in this story, and is that these choices and the gap that exists is not based so much on abilities or the differences in ability between men and women, but more on what we will call non-cognitive psychological aspects, which are strictly related to interests, motivations, aspirations of women. So we will try to understand why some women choose this and prefer this, are more motivated, and while others are not. So, as I said, the context is not new at all. It's a well-known argument. And we know that this is a concerning argument and evidence that we have that women continue to be underrepresented in the labor market overall. So the labor force participation, according to the recent statistics, I hope that these are the most recent one, probably not, we should update them. But however, they're more or less close to these numbers here, that there is still a considerable gender gap in the labor force participation between men and women. It is more or less 30 percentage points. So with females staying at 60% of as the labor force participation rate and men at 90%. So this is a huge and considerable difference. On top of that, women continue to be underrepresented in some certain specific fields, especially in the fields of technology, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which are STEM. For instance, in the European Union, only 17% of the STEM workforce are women. In the States, this percentage is quite similar. And then we have also, for instance, 16 in Japan, 14 in India. In the UK, it's more or less 18 or 17. I don't remember exactly. And moreover, women also continue to be underrepresented in STEM college majors. So, well, of course, today we will talk about occupational choices, but they are a direct consequence also of educational choices. So women are also underrepresented in STEM college majors. And there is also some evidence that's showing that even when, on average, when they have a STEM occupation, a STEM degree, college degree, let's say, they're significantly less likely, on average, to work in the STEM fields compared to men once they enter in the labor market. Now, it would be unfair, quite unfair to say that we do not know much about factors that may influence females' choices regarding education and occupation. We know a lot. We know a lot about the role of education, work-life balance, caregiving responsibility, and all this, let's call them economic factors, let's say. But there is another group of factors, which are the so-called informal institutions, that comprise, for instance, the type of a societal organization in terms of the family type, how the society is organized, the presence of gender stereotypes, and so on and so forth, that may play a significant role. And indeed, they play a very important role. And this is a very important and concerning evidence, first of all, because as we all know, the gender gap in STEM is directly related to the gender wage gap, because STEM occupations are paid more than other sectors. They're also positively linked to the lack of diversity and inclusion, which in turn, at the end, limit the potential of the whole economic system and the industry, and this is bad. But at the same time, once we agree that informal institutions, in terms of norms, rules, conventions, stereotypes, attitudes, they're important, then we should also realize and accept the fact that they're really slow, they're really persistent, and it is very difficult to shape them, to change them. And this has direct consequences for policy implications. If they're so difficult to shape, then we may have problems in changing these attitudes in a medium term, or in the long run, probably we can, but in the short and medium run, it is very difficult. But also from an empirical point of view, we may have, and we have, problems in quantifying this, because if we take if we use the information that usually comes from the surveys, so individual level, self-declared opinions about the role of some informal institutions in a society, this is clearly endogenous. So if we want to isolate the effect, we need to find another way to do this. And in this paper, we propose one way in which this could be done. So what we do here in this paper, we focus on gender-based norms, so rules of conduct that are present in any society and that influence our way of thinking and our perception, even when we are not conscious about this. This is called cultural differences, mentality, we can call it as we want. And they're culturally embedded, so they're very persistent in time, and they're present everywhere. And these are the set of rules that in some sense designate what is more appropriate for men and what is more appropriate for women. When we talk about occupation or education, we can distinguish the classical blue and pink occupations, and so on and so forth. So here, the strength to which the people care about what the society or the neighborhood will say about what you are doing and what you are choosing. And now, these norms, of course, influence significantly preferences and motivations and aspirations that then translates into real choices. And then we observe these real choices afterwards. The very important thing here is that these norms should not influence ability. And we do not have a consistent evidence that differences in norms influence the ability in ability between men and female. On average, yes, there is some evidence, I will show it to you, but between men, so there is no clear gender gradient in ability, but in motivations, yes, as I will say later. In order to alleviate, at least to some extent, the issue of endogeneity, we exploit in this paper the historical roots of norms. So we go 5 centuries back in the history, and we use a very specific set of proxies, which are historical proxies, which are quite recent and quite nice, with many advantages with respect to the other historical proxies already used by the literature. And these proxies capture different aspects of practices, family structures, division of labor, hierarchy in the decision-making process, as a direct consequence of the type of settlements, and many other elements, the characteristics of the ancient societies that then has been transmitted from across generation to our to today. And the nice thing about these proxies, and it will be clear in a minute, is that they capture more the aspect of what men and women should do, and not if they should do this. For instance, in terms of labor market participation, not so much whether women will participate in the labor markets, but what will they choose based on their interests and motivations. So this is the and when we talk about norms and STEM occupations and education, of course, there is an agreement between researchers, both sociologists and economists, that culturally embedded norms may increase significantly the segregation in the STEM fields. And this is mainly due to these stereotypes that I mentioned before. So forces that encourage people to make gender conforming choices that reinforce their or femininity or masculinity. And we have some empirical evidence, also the recent one, that shows that also it may be related to interests and other things in mathematics or in science. For instance, the paper of Breda and the co-authors, they find that math-related gender stereotypes and beliefs about the roles and the ability in mathematics are strongly correlated with lower female participation in math-intensive fields. Or another paper of Rodriguez, Planas, and Nollenberger that show that social gender norms affect parents' expectation of girls' academic knowledge in mathematics and science relative to that of boys, that then at the end lower the rates of participation in these specific fields. All this happens because gender norms are internalized in cognitive processes, right? So we know that females, for all these reasons, on average, they put more value on values such as helping others, contributing to society. So more or less human services occupations, where males, on average, prefer more earning a higher income or doing a technical job. Now, the main question here, and here we are going to come to the point, is where do these norms come from? And as I said, we will go to the history to look and explore the roots of these norms. Now, the story here is relatively simple in the sense that the roots and the origins of all modern societies and all modern institutions are shaped by institutions that are rooted in pre-modern times. So in pre-modern times, and here we think like 500, 600, so 16th, 16th, 17th century on, there were several contextual factors like ecological, geographic, climatic factors that influenced settlement patterns and also the main economic activities and the strength of kinship ties within the society. And these, for instance, in a hunter-based gatherer societies, which were continuously facing ecological uncertainty or resource scarcity, they were typically forming nuclear or families or very small bands, okay? While agricultural society, especially those characterized by a higher intensity of production, of agricultural production, they were living in a complex village communities with very extended kinship networks. So this was the main difference: smaller, expanded, or very dense and concentrated village communities in the other type. And this kin-based, let's say, institutions determined also the characteristics of the society in general. So they determined the degree of social interdependence between the members of the society and between different societies. Okay, but also some psychological traits or characteristics that were related, that were required somehow to sustain different forms of societal organization. For instance, in these extensive kinship ties, which were typical for resource scarce environments, broader networks were necessary for survival, while in the intensive kinship, agricultural society with intensive agricultural production, they had dense interdependent system with very strong in-group loyalty, hierarchical structures of decision, and also a very clear division of roles that I will mention now. So all these kinship characteristics also shaped the characteristics of rules in the society and gender roles, for instance, because in these intensive kinship societies, which were also characterized by a coinciding extended family, so everybody were living together with a very strong kinship ties between them, and connections, and they were characterized by this hierarchical division of roles between men and women, but also by a strong discipline, obedience, collective responsibility, the importance of planning, because this was strictly related also to the characteristics of the agricultural production, and so on and so forth. So all these factors influenced and determined the main characteristics of society in terms of the relationship between people, between individuals, but also in terms of the division of roles or who should do what. Okay, and for instance, and the most important thing is related to this psychological side that were needed to support different types of organizations. So in a less intensive kinship, which are today what we can call individualistic countries, as the other type is collectivistic culture, now characterized by more intense kinship. But in less intensive kinships, they were promoting analytical reasoning differently from the others that were more based on holistic reasoning, creativity, individualism, greater personal autonomy, lower conformity. And these threats seem to be persistent because there are some empirical studies showing that individuals originating from individualistic countries, they outperform their peers that come from a more collectivistic, closed, and very intense kinship-based cultures. But for here, when we talk about ability, there is no evidence for gender gradient. So gradient in cognitive aspects. But the gender gradient and the difference between man and female appears when we start to talk about non-cognitive aspects, which are motivations, interests, and aspirations. And this is at the heart of the so-called gender stratification hypothesis, which all has roots in this type of within society organization that I mentioned before, related to the intensity of kinships, right? Okay, so this graph here just summarizes what I told before. So we had different societal organizations shaped by contextual factors, characterized by different degrees of kinship intensity, which then determined the main building blocks of the societal organization, that then translated into, that had some effects on cognitive traits and non-cognitive threats. So as I mentioned before, and we will show that there are no significant gender gradients in the cognitive trait. They shouldn't be, but the gender should appear as a relevant factor in non-cognitive traits. I think that there is one question, Elena.
Okay, so I kind of got lost where you were talking about agriculture versus, hunter-gathering, and then you kind of jumped. So basically hunter-gathering, you argue that's individualism, and
Yes,
agriculture is communalism.
collectivism. Yeah,
But within agriculture, there's work that shows that even within agriculture, depending on the type of agriculture that people
sure,
use, right, there is more
sure.
gender-friendly and less gender-friendly.
Sure,
So.
that's true. That's true. We do not distinguish between these different types, but that's correct. That's correct. But I just mentioned this as a broader discussion on a general type of system, whether it was more agriculture or hunter-gatherer society, right? But also there are differences also within the agriculture, the set of agricultural societies, of course, in terms of as shown by the literature, also how it influences preferences, different degrees of intensity of production, type of production, and so on and so forth. Yes, but here
Yeah.
we do not
If
focus.
they use the hoe versus,
Yes,
how and
yes.
all this kind of stuff.
Yes, I will mention this. This is one of the historical proxies for labor market participation of Alesina's paper, right? Of the plug, the technology used in the agriculture, whether it was more capital intensive or
Yeah.
less capital intensive. Yeah, I will mention this now in a minute.
Yeah. And sorry, I have another
Yeah.
question. So I agree that, norms are sticky, as you argued.
Mhm.
But there's also evidence that in some circumstances they change quickly. For instance, after World War II, when all the men died, then women
They were
went.
forced to. Yes, yes, that's true.
Then
That's true.
women all of a sudden, they had to go to work. So they changed very quickly. So okay, women shouldn't work, but now go to work.
Yeah, they
So
change. They can change. There are also some interesting examples, I think, from the UK. I don't remember exactly now the name of the initiatives and programs that started already in the 80s, if I'm not wrong, and they were quite efficient in changing these overall attitudes of girls towards STEM education and occupational fields. So they were going through schools. This was a huge initiative at the school level in which they were explaining to the kids, especially girls, that physics or science can be very good for them. And after 20, 30 years, there are results. So it can be changed, of course, but it is more slow changing, let's say, than some other aspects. This was, yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, sure.
So over the centuries, infant mortality was quite high. So in a country where infant mortality is like, maybe every other child dies or whatever before age of five,
Hmm. Hmm.
then a family would have to create, or the women have to give birth to more children just to make sure that two or three survive. And so if you have, so I'm here in Iceland. I'm the only one enjoying the day. It's 15 degrees here.
Lucky
But
you. Lucky
but
you, we
like
have 20 more.
but like the
20.
19th century here, there was a infant mortality was very high. And I know a historian who looked at diaries from farms, so that was agriculture. And it was like this uh, woman who was married, had a family, was writing her diary for the day. And she said, well, it was raining in the morning. This boy has a name, he died. And then it just continued. Then we had the evening happened. This it was like almost a normal occurrence to lose a child. But if women over their childbearing age have to give birth to like 15 children, that must have an effect on their uh, participation in the agricultural work. It's not just that it was capital intensive. I mean, they were uh, for
Sure.
very
This
many
is,
years.
yeah. Mm-mm. This is an excellent point. Indeed, we are not controlling for that, for instance, because I will show you, we perform also a country level analysis. We are not controlling for this. We are taking into consideration some other controls, but this one would be very interesting to control for. And I think that the historical data on this exists. They do exist, right? So
Yeah,
we could take this into consideration. But this is very interesting. Yeah, definitely.
like the Gapminder
Yeah.
website has these wonderful
Yeah, they
charts.
are there. I think that I saw them already, but yeah, yeah, perfect. That's great. Yes, thank you very much for this.
Daphne?
That,
Okay, yeah, thanks. May I ask the following? Have you considered different type of employment relationships? Because if these women in agriculture are self-employed, this is a different, in what I've studied, completely different situation compared to if they are dependent employees.
okay. No, we considered in the empirical part, we just consider whether they work in STEM fields or not. I don't remember whether we control for the fact that they're self-employed or dependent. I'm not very sure. I don't remember. Or the sector, because we have this, the dependent variable will be dummy variable whether they work in this specific set of STEM related fields or not. Uh, but I don't know. I don't remember now exactly if we control for self-employment or different types of employment. Yeah.
I meant more about the past history.
About the past, you are saying,
Yeah.
we don't have this, we don't have. Now I will show you the proxies that we have that are not strictly related to the labor, to the economic, how to say, behavior of people at that time, but more on some societal characteristics. You will see there are 5 different components. Maybe we can come to this point a bit later when I show you the proxies that we are using, okay? Based on this story, we propose to estimate 3 different hypotheses. So first, I was talking about motivation. So these non-cognitive things, aspirations, interests, and not so much about the ability. So what we want to first check is that whether countries with more intensive ancestral kin-based institutions, whether they have on average distinct gender non-cognitive skills, so motivations, aspirations of women, okay, related to scientific subjects, so math or science. The second thing is that we want to check then after whether those countries have also on average today a lower share of women in STEM. So this first part of the analysis is at the country level. And it serves as to give us the confirmation somehow that the main broad channels that I mentioned before are verified. We also perform this analysis at the individual level, and the results are more or less the same, so in line, so nothing strange happens. And here we will use the PISA data. I will explain now in a second. The second part of the analysis is it at the individual level. And what we want to do is to show that whether women at the individual level with more intensive ancestral kin-based origins, parental origins, and we will consider second-generation migrants, and I will explain shortly, if they are on average less likely to sort into STEM of professions. And at the end, what we would also like to show that this relationship between historical kinship and today's contemporary choices is not only direct, but it also passes indirectly through a set of contemporary cultural characteristics that I will show you later which one we consider. Okay, so this would mean that they are culturally embedded. Okay, so three main hypotheses. Now, the measures that we are using here is a novel set of historical measures from Schultz and co-authors from 2019, published in Nature. Yes. No question. Okay. And this set of indices, they come from the ethnographic atlas, and they first developed 2 types of indicators at the ethnic group level and at the country level. So they started from a georeference data at the ethnic group level in the past, and they collected information on 5 different dimensions, and then they aggregated this information also at the country level, following the contemporary borders of the country. So these indices can be used for, we can use it for the contemporary countries today, and they refer to the situation in the 16th century. And it includes more than 1,200 ethnic groups, if I remember well. Okay, and the main measure, and this aggregate composite indicator, it is called kinship intensity index, includes these elements. I will explain briefly in a second each of these. First one is the presence or not of cousin marriages, which is directly related to the intensity of kinships within the society. The second one is the presence of polygamy, and which type of polygamy. Is it partial, total, or there is a monogamy? The type of residence of people, whether the families are mostly co-residing in the same restricted place, which is the co-residence of extended families, then also the characteristics of the descent of the lineage, whether it is direct or it is exclusive or not exclusive, and also how the community is organized, which is related also to the co-residence of extended family. The nice thing of these measures is they're very diverse, and they consider several different aspects, and they also are related also to these non-cognitive aspects of the hierarchical division. What should you be interested in? What should be your correct choice? And so all this, what I mentioned before. And they're slightly different from the two that have been already used in the literature. The one of Alesina on the characteristics of the agricultural production. So in the society that were more capital intensive, for instance, and male dominated, there was no need for women to be involved much in the production. So they were staying home doing other things. And they show that today countries or individuals with these specific backgrounds, the participation rate of women in the labor market, but also in politics and some other aspects, is lower than compared to other different cultural backgrounds. And also, for instance, Todd's family types, which are partly overlap with the kinship intensity, obviously, because there are some components that are quite similar. However, there are different measures. I just put here graphically kinship intensity index, which is a normalized index, against four main types of families from Todd and against the Alesina's measure of plague, which is between 0 and 1. So we can see that the correlation is 0, at least for Alesina, or something close to 0. And we can also see that kinship intensity index can assume different values within each set of family types. So they're not overlapping completely. And the kinship intensity index then captures several other aspects, societal aspects, that are maybe not perfectly reflected by the family type. So this cousin marriage prevalence, why is it important? First of all, because it impedes the development of broader connections between people within the community and between different communities. So it is an indicator of a very strong societal or family ties. Polygamy, according to the literature and to this mechanism, polygamy should foster kinship intensity through two different channels. One is the reproductive one, because there are fewer men that reproduce, which increase group relatedness, genetic relatedness. And also this type of marriages favors the formation of a bigger extended households with a strong ties within that. Co-residence of extended family, when more generations live in the same place, they are also connected by a very strong ties. Lineage organization, how the descent is organized in the society. Is it exclusive, so it must follow or the mother's or the father's line, or can be from both sides? So if it is not exclusive, so from both sides of the family, this is an indicator of a weaker family ties with respect to a very exclusive descent, okay? Good. For instance, in this panel here, you can see the distribution of values of kinship intensity index across countries. Reddish is more is a higher value, yes, and green is a lower value. So there is certain heterogeneity across the globe. Most, let's say, Africa is all red, so they have the highest level of kinship intensities, and also Asia, Europe a bit less, but we have certain heterogeneity also within Europe. We can see that the Balkans and the Central Europe is higher than in the Western Europe or in the Scandinavian countries, Finland excluded. So there is a heterogeneity. So for the data, the first part and the first hypothesis that is related to motivations and aspirations, we rely on a PISA data set, the most recent one from 2021 too. And we consider some variables that are strictly related to motivations and interests. The first one is the mathematical anxiety, which measures how students self-report their feelings when they're asked to do mathematics, whether they're stressed, whether they're anxious, whether they feel helpless, and so on. Then we have another variable, the instrumental motivation, how the individuals, whether they perceive mathematics as important for their future. This is a direct, let's say, an indicator of the interest, general interest and usefulness of mathematics. Then we have another variable, students' beliefs about learning mathematics, and mathematics self-efficacy, which is on the borderline between the perception of ability and the interest itself. We also consider scores, just to show that there is no significant gender gradient in scores. And this is for the first hypothesis, so motivational side. And then, as I said,
Sorry,
again,
Matija. Sorry, there is a question in the chat. Does the index include something on religion?
we control for the religion, yes. We control for the percent of individuals in the main religious groups in a country. Yes. Yes, we do. Okay, so, and the last part in which we show that the effects of intensive historical kinship passes through the contemporary cultural threats. Here we consider different cultural characteristics, which are probably known also to you. Some comes from the Hofstede's work, others from World Value Survey out of Hofstede, or by Alesina and so. So we will consider several characteristics that are strictly related to intensive or less intensive kinship, historical kinships, like individualism that I mentioned before, obedience. So how important is the obedience in general for the certain population, or the importance of a proper behavior. So what is within an household, what is acceptable or not as a behavior within the household and in the society in general, the importance of tradition, how it's important to respect it, to follow customs, rules, and so on and so forth, embeddedness, the degree of restraint, which is also one of the indicators that can be used as a competitor for individualism. So it is related to collectivism restraint. So the importance of norms and restrictions in a society and a proper behavior, and also importance of family. Of course, that these variables at the country level come from individual surveys, and they are, of course, endogenous because they're based on the responses. But we will just, in the empirical part, when we perform the two-stage analysis, we will try to isolate the effect of this contemporary culture that can be attributed to the historical variables, not only kinship, but also a set of geographical variables and others, and we will use it as an instrument in the individual level regression. The data that we are using, individual level data here, is the European Social Survey. This survey contains the whole population in the sense that both natives and first generation immigrants. We will consider the set of second generation migrants, since we want to exploit the variation in the parental cultural backgrounds. This is the so-called epidemiological approach. So only second generation migrants. And whenever possible, we will control for a set of parental characteristics, especially education, highest educational attainment, and the main occupation of parents. Yes. As for the main dependent variable, which is the STEM, working or not in STEM occupations, we will consider the main definition of STEM based on ISCO codes. The first one is this bold one, which is the main one that we'll consider, that consider life and physical science, engineering, information technology, and mathematics. And then we will also consider two alternatives, one as a sensitivity, the one that adds to additional sectors, health professionals and health associate professionals, and STEM related. It is the biggest one that adds then architecture and some other sectors from health. I don't remember now exactly which one, but however, the main one is the first one, which is the standard definition of STEM occupations. Okay. Good. As for the individual level characteristics, we consider rich set of demographic and socioeconomic information. So education, age, religion, political involvement, absence of parents, everything that we can, according, of course, to the literature. And for parents, as I said, whether they were white or blue collars and country of birth, we do not have any information on the financial situation in childhood, if I'm not wrong, but the fact that the parents were white or blue collar may be some kind of a proxy also for a financial situation or their educational level, for instance. Okay, as I said, we will follow here the epidemiological approach, which allows us to separate the effects, potential effects of culture from the other economic or institutional societal factors, because these are native individuals who were born and raised in the same identical economic and political system, but they have different backgrounds. So under the assumption that these different characteristics have been transmitted from one generation to another, we should observe some variation in their behavior and choices, capitis paribus. Okay, good. And we also control for a set of omitted geographical and institutional characteristics from parental countries of origin. Here we just summarize the main models. So the first hypothesis is at the country level, in which we will regress the motivational variables for mathematics, but for the science is analogous, so I did not report that. And also the share of female in STEM at the country level. We will regress it on the kinship index of that country. Then we will also include a set of geographical historical controls that include the mean distance to waterways, for instance, or the absolute latitude, average terrain roughness, and so on and so forth. We will also consider some contemporary socioeconomic characteristics like GDP per capita, the percent of female researchers in the economy, gender parity index, and some other. The first hypothesis is individual level data analysis, in which we will consider the dependent variable that I explained a minute ago on STEM on the full set of individual specific characteristics. And then finally, we will do the two-stage analysis, in which we will first exploit from the cultural indices at the country level the component that can be attributed to historical kinship intensity, and we would use it in the second stage as an instrument for individuals' choices for STEM or not. Okay. We also perform this in another way, just considering both stages at the individual level, and the results are the same. Okay, let me show you the first set of results. So in which we calculate the average of responses for males and females on the questions on anxiety, motivations, and interests in mathematics, and we regress it on a set of country-specific controls. What we can see here, and the kinship intensity index, when we consider anxiety, for instance, we can see that countries with an intensive kinship intensity background, so history of an intensive kinship, they have a significantly higher share of females saying that they're anxious or hopeless when they need to study and solve mathematical problems. They don't like it. So the share of females that do not like mathematics in this sense is significantly higher in countries with this specific historical backgrounds. The motivation is also significantly lower for females coming from these specific backgrounds. Okay, at the country level, in this case. For males, we do not observe any significant difference. Okay, it is almost, and not significantly different from zero. So this was anxiety and motivation. Similar results we obtained for self-efficacy and perceived ability. Okay, for self-efficacy, less differences and no difference between genders when we consider, for instance, the full set of controls. While the perceived ability, there is a significantly higher share of females saying that the perceived, not only ability, but also interest in mathematics is lower. Higher is the historical kinship intensity in their countries of residence. Okay, that was at the country level. But when we consider scores, as I said, we observe a general negative correlation between scores, both for men and female, and the kinship intensity. And this is related to what I mentioned at the beginning about the individualism. So higher is the kinship intensity in the past, lower was the degree of individualism, and lower should be the individualism today. Okay, and this means that, according to some literature, that less individualistic societies should perform less well in terms of scores on average with respect to society which are more individualistic. And these results here somehow go in that direction. We did not go deep into this part because this is about pure ability. So these are scores. But this result gives us some intuition and idea that it could go in that direction. So there are no significant gender differences in scores, while for the main motivation variables there are. And here, the same thing is when we regress the percent of women in STEM at the country level on kinship intensity, we observe a strong negative correlation. Okay, and this is what we were expecting. But for instance, when we control for the Alesinas agricultural technology, okay, that was more related to whether they participate and not what they do. We observed that there is no significant relationship in any. We also control in many other regressions for this type of agricultural technology in the past, but we do not observe any significant difference for this type of choices, STEM or non-STEM. Good. So this was at the country
Sorry,
level. Yes.
That's probably because this is average at the country level, no? So because it's like everything is. You already said that, you don't go too deep, but it could be that.
It could be.
Yeah.
Maybe we could explore a bit this aspect, definitely. But yeah, you're right. You're right. We used it mostly as a control, just to be in line with the literature and complete. But it is an incredibly important aspect. Yeah, we should deepen a bit at the analysis of that. There are several other parts that we should improve, definitely. But one of these is this. Yes, definitely. Good. So I don't know how much time I have, not much. Briefly, the individual level analysis. So now we consider a set of second generation migrants, female migrants. So we are considering only the pool of women, and we are analyzing the differences within the pool of women. So what we do here, we consider the second generation migrants. To each individual, we attach the information on historical kinship on their parental country of origin. And we have three different definitions of second generation migrants, or those whose one or both parents were born abroad, those with mother born abroad and father born everywhere, or father born, but typical as in the literature, an epidemiological approach. And the main results do not change. They're the same. So what we observe, and of course we control for the full set of individual level characteristics and so on. So what we can see from here, the first dot is kinship index, so the composite one. And then we have the five components of the index. We can observe that individuals, women whose parents come from countries with a higher historical backgrounds, kinship intensity, they're significantly less likely to choose to work in a STEM sector today, and probably because they also were less likely to choose a STEM educational field, college major. Okay. When we look at the components, we see that the cousin marriage presence is quite important, and also the extended family. The others do not seem. We did not go deeply into understanding why one component is more important than another at this specific constant. We may do that also, but this is just this separately for each dimension. Okay, so this confirms the initial intuition. The same results, we obtain the same results when we change the definition of second generation migrants. So starting from the initial definition, which is individuals with either one or both parents born abroad, we can consider also only mothers born abroad and only fathers born abroad. And what we observe here is what is generally observed in the epidemiological approach literature, that the mother's effect is extremely strong, and it's almost always like that, no? Probably because of the educational pattern, and fathers is less important. Okay.
Maybe a couple of minutes, Matija.
Yeah, I don't have much. Okay, main results. The nice thing is that then we did the same thing for the male subsample, and we do not obtain statistically significant results. So these differences and the effects of historical kinship is relevant only for females, so between different women in the pool of women, not for men. What we observe, for instance, is that, for instance, when you ask for a job priority, there is a question in European Social Survey asking who should have the priority to have a job when the jobs are scarce, right? Should it be a man or a woman in a couple? And then you can see here, if you ask these men come with the backgrounds, with the strong intensive kinship backgrounds, are much more likely to say, yes, we should work and women should not work, or something like that. This is not a perfect proxy. This is only a proxy for norms and beliefs, and not so much for the type of occupation, but men, for instance, this is significant, but they're not significant for, okay. The last part, I will skip the last part because we don't have much time anymore. But what we show in this part, just 1 minute, is that, as I said, we consider at the country level several cultural characteristics, okay, ranging from individualism, importance of tradition, restraint, obedience, and so on and so forth. We regress it on the kinship intensity in the past, together with the full set of geographical climatic controls and everything else. Then, from this first stage, we take the predicted values, okay, and then we use it as an instrument and the individual level in a second stage, okay, in order to show a significant coefficient of, for instance, instrumented individualism, okay, shows that cultures with a higher individualism today are more likely to have a higher share of women in STEM. Okay, so this could be used as an indication that the effect is reflected by the contemporary cultures. Okay, and this is not so strange because we were also expecting that, of course. And then we do this for all the okay. To conclude, I hope that the mechanism that we had in mind was clear enough for you. There are certain things that we should already still clarify in all these mechanisms, but the main point here is that we tried to show that these specific aspects of historical organization of society, net of the others that have been considered, whether they participated more or less in the economic life or not, but that this specific set of norms may have influenced the aspirations and motivations and interests of individuals, then translate into different educational and occupational choices. And as I said, here, a bit harder question remains when we accept the fact that norms are persistent and they're very important, how to influence them. They can be changed, as Elena was saying, definitely, but maybe policymakers should invest more in some kind of programs as the ones that I mentioned in the UK from the 80s and 90s to increase the awareness among women, girls, about the importance and correctness of doing this, but also push on the social media, of course, and all the others. So this was briefly. So I hope that I convinced you at least in part about the story.
Okay, thank you, Matija. Juana, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. No, just a second, Fanny. Let Juana ask. Yeah, she raised her hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation of the paper. Very interesting, and you're getting into a point that is, I think, common to many professions and areas. I have just 2 comments. The first one is, you started with something saying woman is underrepresented, yes, in STEM occupations, but in participation in general, right? It would be great to see the indicators a little bit disaggregated, meaning inside each STEM occupation, you have different occupational profiles by ISCO, right? And as an example, for instance, in health workers, you would have nurses and doctors, right? And already those two, you can look at why women choose to study or to become nurse and not medical doctor. And if you see the participation in that sector, for instance, you would see that there's more women than men, right? And that already will change you the like what is behind all of this. And it would be great to look at it because those issues are behind. But although we talk about STEM as general, actually we are becoming more into what is the difference between those things on choosing, and that will help a lot because actually you can see, for instance, in I can tell you, like Central Asian countries, women will be gynecologists, very specialists and everything, but the moment they can marry, depending on what they do, they might leave the work, right? So what is linked to that? And my second comment would be then, so just to see it inside sectorally, right? Like the occupationals. But the second is also to look to see how can you add the variable to actually differentiate at least by region or sub-regions. So you can, or something that map you really some cultural differences, right? Depending on the information. I mean, you can have some kind of thing, and that will bring you a little bit more that can be useful at the policy level. I'm thinking more about how can you transform the what we economists do in that, but to bring it to that. But from that, like, thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much.
Over.
Indeed, should I reply now or later?
Yeah, maybe Fanny, you can ask your question and then you can reply together.
All right, I just have a quick question. So when you look at the parental controls, maybe I missed something. So as far as the parents' education is concerned, or parents' occupation, I mean, do you think that if they're in STEM fields or whatever, do you think that that might have some effect? And then the other thing I had is maybe when you showed that, especially the Lozid results, in stage one, I was looking, I mean, I don't know how strong those instruments were in terms of the, because, you know, we have some ground rules we like to follow. So if I'm looking at your, hopefully the second stage results you showed us, those are, I hope, are those marginal effects? Are those coefficient estimates? I don't know.
Marginal.
Are they marginal effects?
So,
are they probabilities? The second stage.
yes, if I'm not wrong, yes.
Okay, so if I'm looking at such a small coefficient, like whatever,
it's quite small.
0.001, I mean, should I lose a lot of sleep on it?
Yeah, because this indicator individualism between 0 and 100. And then, yes, that's true. But for the first, I'm really sorry, I forget to put the statistics in the first stage. But everything seems fine. But you are right here. We should have specified this before. But these are marginal effects, right? I don't know if my co-author is here that can confirm, but I think that yes, I'm almost convinced.
Yes, I confirm. There are marginal effects. Yes.
And sorry, and then for the first comment, that would be incredibly interesting to do. First, disaggregating by region and analyzing within country, for instance, variation within something variation that could complement the results obtained from this type of analysis. My concern here is the numerosity of the sample. Because, why? Because for the kinship, for instance, kinship intensity, we have some data at the regional level, historical kinship at the regional level. The authors constructed it at the regional level for some countries in Europe. If I'm not wrong, one is Italy, the second one is Germany. Okay, so we could perform some kind of analysis, but the numerosity of the sample would be quite small. So I'm afraid that it may not be feasible, but this is definitely to be checked, or maybe complemented with some other types of data, some other data source. And another thing that I forgot about the STEM fields of the parents, unfortunately, we do not have the sector of parents, I think. We have the occupational situation and whether they were, but we were not able to distinguish whether they worked in STEM or not. Because I think, if I'm not wrong, that the ISCO level was 1. It was not disaggregated for parents, so we couldn't know whether in the ISCO level 1, no ISCO, sorry, no ISCO.
ISCO, yes.
Whether it was STEM or not, so unfortunately, the only thing that we could take into consideration for parents was whether they were blue or white collar, and the educational level, highest educational level. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I got to run now. Okay,
much.
Thanks so much, Mahmoud.
Okay, thanks, Fani.
you.
See you. Thanks. So I think we should stop here. We're just about over time. If you have any questions, I'm sure Matija will be happy to answer by email.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for such an interesting talk, Matija, and hope to see you soon in the